Welcome back into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and on today's episode, we are talking with Mark Harris, who created a website called waterfallsofontario.com, where he has poured his passions of waterfalls, and 100% pun was intended, by the way, into this interactive map where you can see all of the different waterfalls that you can find in Ontario. Not every single waterfall has been documented, but it's an ever-growing list as Mark and the community that he's built around it has added to it with different styles, whether it's a day trip, overnight, etc. A really cool map. And so myself and Bill sat down and talked with Mark about where this passion started and how it has fostered a community in the tens of thousands. Well, we're pleased to welcome in Mark Harris from Waterfalls of Ontario. This is a very interesting thing, too, because, Mark, you have a website that just recently relaunched. It's called waterfallsofontario.com. It's a really cool website for just in terms of, and I'll put some visuals up for the video people who are on YouTube and on our website. And for the audio people, I will put in the link in the description as well, so you can check the website out. Again, it's waterfallsofontario.com. And I don't really know exactly how to describe this, but it's a really cool website because it's kind of modern, but also it's kind of retro at the same time. Kind of reminds me of, the mid 2000s in terms of like how the text is. So it's a really well done website. So first of all, Mark, congratulations on the launch of the website. And I've been going on a little bit long. So once again, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Ben. It's good to be here. Yeah, it's actually, the website's been going now for 25 years, believe it or not. It's retro because those are the skills I learned in the late 90s and early 2000s. I'm not a developer, so I tend to use what I know how to do. And I've had some accolades from developers that said, good for you for not using the templates that everyone else uses.
Absolutely.
It just makes it gives it that retro feel, I suppose, and I'm glad to see other people are seeing that and not just me.
Yeah, well, It makes it stand out, right? Like as soon as I opened it up, I was like, wow, this is so interesting. And again, it's, as you said, you've been doing this since, it said 1999, which is, well, I was 5. I was born in 1994, so I don't know if that dates things. But I'm going to throw.
What dates me?
I'm going to throw over to Bill here. Bill, tell us a little bit about Mark, a little bit about the waterfalls, and why you wanted to bring him onto the show.
Yeah, Ben, I'm old or not old, and Mark's website, I came across it, and again, I thought to myself, this is kind of the thing that a resource that people need to know about. And I am a member and I am a follower. In fact, in the last few days, in the last 72 hours, I know my friend Brian Emblem from Timmins, he's posted Raven Lake, Larder River, and we were just up there, and he posted on and did put up a number of photos. And so people do this. And so we're glad to have Mark on the podcast, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And we've got questions for him. And I think one of the first questions, Mark, is how did you get this started? Because you love waterfalls.
Yeah, I figured that would be the first question. And I was going to come up with some crazy idea about, remembering being 3 years old and trudging through waterfalls with my parents on nature trips. No, that didn't happen. I lived just north of Toronto in the suburbs, and there were no waterfalls around us. I'm sure I saw a couple on summer vacation and so on. But I think my interest really got going when I was a geography student at Brock University. We were right on the Niagara Escarpment. Campus is right there. It makes it easy to get to a lot of waterfalls, and professors were always looking for some way to make their classes more interesting. So we would go and learn about geology and hydrology and sedimentology and all these sciencey things at waterfalls. I remember saying, wow, this is actually kind of a cool spot to be. Way better than being in a class. A couple years later, I inherited my grandfather's old SLR camera. And one of the first things I knew I wanted to try was that long exposure, sort of slow, milky, love it or hate it type picture that you see of many waterfalls. And I was able to make a go of it, and wow, this is good. This is gives me a new hobby. And at the same time, when I was in grad school, I sort of got voluntold to go to some course about making websites. And I had no idea. I wasn't a computer guy. I had no idea what this meant, what I was going to do with it. And one day, I got the idea, wow, wait a minute. I've got a whole bunch of pictures I've been taking. I know how to make a website. Why don't I do it? So in 1999, the first site went online. It was called Waterfalls of Southern Ontario at the time. and it's been going ever since. The name's changed a few times. Got a new. It became Waterfalls of Ontario a couple years later as I expanded my scope, and it's been going ever since.
Yeah, and that's very fortuitous, and that's all about you. But tell us about all the different reasons why other people love waterfalls.
Well, a great question. I mean, I've also maintained a Facebook group. I think you're alluding to that earlier, Ben, Waterfalls of Ontario, and that's been going for about 13 years or so now. And we get people from all walks of life. Some people are in it for photography. They're great subjects. Getting up early in the morning. There's mist rising, as I mentioned, the slow, milky, fancy look. We get people hiking. We get people that are just out for a day trip, looking for something to do, just to get out in nature. During COVID, the pandemic, waterfalls were extremely popular. I think too popular. People couldn't go to the mall, they couldn't go to the movies, so they were finding things to do. And I think we gained a few followers during that area. People say, "Hey, this is actually not too bad. It's not too expensive. I get outside, get some exercise, meet a couple other people." We've got people in our group. There's one guy named Gary that's been to almost 900 waterfalls.
Wow.
Most of them in Ontario, but not all of them. Another guy named Kit's been to over 500 waterfalls, and I don't even know if I'm at that level myself. But once you get the bite, or once you get the bug, some people just go with it. I find personally it's a great way to see Ontario. There's lots of corners of the province I've never would have gone to, never would have seen, never would have even driven through if it wouldn't been for some waterfall I was trying to get to that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So one of the biggest draws I think on this website is your interactive map. And I'm just looking at it now. I'll throw it up on the screen as well. But the first question I want to ask, Mark, is how do you define, what is the definition of a waterfall? How do you figure out what counts and what doesn't?
Another good question. And the answer is, if it looks like a waterfall and you can enjoy it like a waterfall, then I generally consider it to be a waterfall. There have been some other surveys, like I think New York State, for example, lots of work done there, and they had a 5-foot cutoff saying anything greater than 5 feet is a waterfall, anything less doesn't count. It's hard to come up with a height threshold because sometimes it's hard to even describe or measure the height. Not every waterfall is vertical. As we'll see from some of the photos, a lot of them aren't. Especially up in Northern Ontario, many of the waterfalls are not vertical. So where do you start measuring? One thing I do, though, is because of my geoscience background, I'm a professional geoscientist by trade. I typically deal with natural waterfalls, anything based on bedrock. So there are some places that people could enjoy as a waterfall, like a dam, for example, some of the old mill dams, for example, but I tend to stay away from those.
Can I just, and I'm kind of ignorant to the waterfall stuff because this is new to me. How do people enjoy waterfalls? When you say people are enjoying them, what do people do? What is it that draws people to these pieces of nature?
Well, I can speak for myself. Just being there and sitting and feeling the power and the roar of the water, the mist. This is a part of the landscape where everything's happening. Right? You can drive through the countryside, see a nice scenery and whatever, but you get to a waterfall, all eyes are on the waterfall. It doesn't matter who you are. You may not have the bug like I do or like many others do, but it's everything's in motion. It's hitting all your senses. You can feel the spray. You can smell the water sometimes. So people use them, as I mentioned, for photography. They use them for hiking destination. Lots of trails and lots of people hiking these days. It's kind of that's that turnaround point, if you will. The hike, hike 4 kilometers this way to the waterfall and then turn around to come back. So even the little ones are great for that reason. It's something to see. It just gives you a reason to be out.
Ben's going to see a couple of waterfalls, Mark, in a couple of weeks on the Mattawa, North Bay to Mattawa canoe race, and he's going to see the Talon Chutes and Paracou Falls. And I think I just wanted to follow up on that. It's a multi-sensory experience for a whole bunch of different reasons. And when you read the Facebook posts or what have you, you understand very quickly that it's like a magnet. People are drawn to that. I think that moving water and the sound and what have you.
Yeah, they've said that the only other thing that compares is fire. So if you're sitting around a bonfire, staring at the fire and just mesmerized by it, and I think that some of that same influence hits people as well. Personally, for me, I just use it as a reason to get out. I'm a geographer by training. I love to see Ontario. It's a lot cheaper than going overseas, and there's so many of these gems in our backyard. So it just gives me something to get out and gives me a reason for exploring.
And just sorry, Bill. Just looking at this map, how many I guess, are these all the known waterfalls, or is this only a percentage of what we know in Ontario? I guess, how complete is this map?
Well, the map's going to be in progress until the day I die, or until the day I stop doing this. I mean, there are lots and lots of waterfalls. Now, that being said, I think most of the ones that people would be interested in visiting in Southern Ontario are going to be on the map. There might be a few here, hidden there. They might be smaller, but anything with a name that people can get to and normally do is likely on here by now. As I said, we've been building this for about 25 years. I say we. I'm the one that's been building the map, but I've been getting input from hundreds and hundreds of people, whether they're in the Facebook group, whether they're emailing me after using the website. The one thing that we don't do on this website, though, is include waterfalls on private property. So there are a number, probably more so in Southern Ontario, even though the number is still small. There are some that, and other resources like I won't mention even some of the mapping resources out there. People can put a point on the map and say, "Hey, everybody, go here and see it." But that's something I feel strongly about. I mean, I don't believe anybody has a right to be on someone's land unless they're invited there. And the good thing is that number of those that we can't see regularly like that is very small. So I just ignore them. So there will be some missing that people might be familiar with.
And is there a reason you just stay just within the confines of Ontario, or are you looking to expand eventually? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if I've got the energy for a retirement project, maybe. The good thing about doing this is it gives you a boundary, right? It gives you, because if you kept going forever, you might not really finish, right? And that's sort of the problem. I'm kind of hoping that with this project, we'll be able to finish, quote unquote, we'll be able to really look at Ontario and do a good job at it. There are a couple websites out there which are very well done that look at things from the the global scale. They've got country by country, and I don't know how these guys have the time to do that, but they do. But for me, I had to put a boundary around this project. It's a hobby project after all. I mean, I'm not quitting my day job. I've got a family to raise, other things to do, and dishes to wash. So I got to have a limitation on how much expansion we actually do.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mark, because as Backroads Bill, this is my avocation as well. It's not my vocation. And I wanted you to tell us about the evolution of the first book and the editions that followed after that, because Waterfalls, not only on the Facebook page and on the website, but in print as well. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it was actually a fluke how that book got started. I had no plans to make a book. This was 22 years ago, or 21 years ago now. 22 years ago when they contacted me. And I mean, there was no such thing as self-publishing. Books were just something that famous people did, not some guy from London, Ontario. But what happened was that the Firefly Books already had a photographer, George Fisher, who had been photographing waterfalls. And he'd done a number of books. And they found my website. They were looking for resources. How can we write some captions? What kind of, how do we beef up, add a little bit of text to his photographs? So they contacted me, and I was youthful and enthusiastic back then, and suggested, well, why don't we do a little more? These are great places to visit. They're on public land. We can talk about them. And they bought it. They thought this is a great idea. And what we ended up having was a good combination between sort of George's fantastic artwork, but also a bit of the science that I had taken from my university days, as well as just some of the the tourism appeal. So we put it together. It came out. That was 2003 was the first edition. We mainly covered Southern Ontario. We got as far up as Wawa and Algoma. But we barely got north of North Bay. I don't think we did actually back then. And again, should we have? Yes, we should have. But with any project like this, there's timelines, there's limited budgets. And again, I was working, George was working. It's a sort of project where it's got to get started. You've got to have a boundary on it, or it will never finish.
I really like the boundary idea too. Now, I've done stories with Mark before, and I think I've done a couple of them and updated my stories. Now, one waterfall that Ben's not going to ask me my favorite because I'm going to ask him his favorite. But and I know one of my favorites is New Post Falls. Have you got to New Post Falls yet, north of Smooth Rock Falls? I
haven't got there yet. It's on my big bucket list. It's in our book. We call it The Beast of the Northeast because it is so impressive. It is becoming, in my Facebook group, I can see it becoming sort of a rite of passage. You've made it. if you've made it to New Post Falls.
And I remember that the first time I went to New Post Falls, and there's Backroads Bill vignettes on that in Northern Ontario Travel, and it is a destination kind of like the Agawam Falls, not the one you see from the tour train, but you have to hike into this as well, or cross over the tracks and come in a back way, because there's some of these waterfalls that are difficult to come to. Now, I'm not going to ask you your most definitive waterfall that you like, but maybe mention a few of them, and there may be some geographic parity or not. But what are some of the ones that struck you right from the beginning and up until this point in time?
So I find myself drawn to waterfalls that you can get close to. So it's not necessarily about finding the biggest or the most powerful or the most spectacular. It's ones that you can sit beside that are sort of people-sized, maybe 5, 6, 8 meters tall, for example. Things that you don't have to really worry about falling into a deep gorge, because there have been lots of injuries at waterfalls. So there's one just outside the Sault Ste. Marie called Robertson Creek Falls. It's right near the Robertson Cliffs, and it's just behind the parking lot. I don't think many people know about it, but it's just far enough away from the parking lot, away from the main trail up to the hill there, that really very few people ever go. And it's not too big, it's not too small. It's always flowing. It's nice and green, a little muddy on the way down. Also prevents a few people from going down. But I really like that one. There's a bunch in the Niagara Escarpment that I like for sort of sentimental reasons. Again, these are places that were special during my university days. Louth Falls, for example, even Balls Falls or Rockaway Falls. That's sort of where I consider my sort of home base for waterfalling. Ironically, well, not, but, coincidentally, it being the very southernmost set of waterfalls we have, and it just went from there.
Ben, what's your favorite waterfall?
I got two.
Okay.
So Deschênes Falls is an easy one because it's where we live and it's right there. It's a big part of. There's a whole trail system bit around it. My other one is Cooper's Falls. I don't know if it's on. I've been looking. I don't know if it's on here or if you guys. I'm assuming you guys have heard of it, right?
Yeah, it's in the Muskoka area.
So it's by Aurelia. Do you know it, Bill?
I've only heard of it, not seen it.
I have a really good family friend. They own property that's literally on the falls. But it's almost like it's more of a stream kind of waterfall, so it's very long versus very high. Yeah. But it's a really nice area, and that's probably the one that's not the cop-out answer of Deschênes Falls. That's probably the two that jump out to me the most.
How many followers now, Mark, on the Facebook?
We're up to about 45,000.
Holy
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, again, yesterday, Brian Emblem, who's been on the podcast, he posted the Larder River, Raven Lake Falls, and on it goes. And I mean, if you check in regularly, you'll see people. There are these top contributors now. They're like the ones that have been to 900 or 500. They've been to so many, and it's just like I don't want to say it's a rite of passage, but I think it goes back to that first reason. It's all about vitamin N and getting outside and being somewhere special.
And is this Mark? Is this people from all walks of life or in all different areas and stuff? It's not just people who live in the area; it's people from all over the world.
Well, most of our members are from Ontario.
Okay,
we do get people visiting, but I mean, there are. I mean, some people stay in their own area. Like there's a woman named Karen that likes to post lots of pictures from the Niagara Peninsula and Hamilton. She knows the area very well. I mean, she's the expert. I go to her saying, where do you park for this site? But there are also people that have taken the book or the website and made a vacation out of it, made a week vacation. We have another rite of passage, which is a little easier to manage than New Post Falls, but we call it the Thunder Run, where you drive from Southern Ontario up to Thunder Bay and back. Is all the way along the Trans-Canada Highway is waterfall after waterfall. Some of them are easily accessed, some of them are a little more difficult. And I've been contacted by a number of people saying, this was great. We didn't know what we were going to do. We got this book. We saw these maps. They said, why don't we make a trip out of it? So I'm trying to convince my own family to do that. If my teenage sons are thinking like I was back then, they may not be interested just yet, but I think they'll get there eventually. I know my wife would be, certainly.
So how does that feel for you personally to put all the work that you've put into it and then really get that kind of engagement back, whether it's on Facebook, people sending you pictures, people using your products? How does that make you feel just from a personal level?
Well, it makes me feel great. It makes me feel like I've done something to help society. I mean, my typical story is some people coach soccer, some people coach hockey. I would not be a really good coach, but I consider myself a waterfall coach, if you will, right? We've brought this, and as I've said, hearing from people over the years that how much they've enjoyed it. But it isn't all about me. I mean, this even though I did do all the coding and the design of the website, there's no way that it would be what it was without the community we have. I've got emails dating from 20 years ago with people sending me, little tiny photos taken from, 1 and 2 megapixel cameras from back then, versus right up to today with people sending video and so on. And, I think it's that feedback, it's you give a little and you get a lot more back. And that's what's been so rewarding, I think. Because it certainly, even though it's my website, I believe that it's our whole community has put it together.
Yeah, no, I really like the you are a waterfall coach and you've won the Stanley Cup. That's to be sure. But maybe a couple comments again, because it's all about evolution now. And of course, yesterday I took some drone shots, which I haven't even looked at yet. Drove back from Larder Lake late afternoon, and video and just that multi-dimensional approach now of seeing waterfalls, because I think the first thing is that, of course, it entices people to want to go to that destination.
Yeah, I think people, and love it or hate it, social media is helping with that. It's making people realize, gee, we've got some interesting places right in our backyard. And a lot of them are free other than the travel, which, today's day and age, I mean, it's certainly helping me. Social media has been a sort of a two-edged sword, as I'm sure you're aware. I mean, some places we've certainly have been completely overloaded, especially during COVID. It got so bad that some waterfalls were being closed, and that's something I hadn't come before. I mean, they couldn't go anywhere else, so they wanted to sit in the water. And a lot of people weren't even used to being out hiking at that point. So there were all kinds of rope rescues from people being stuck in gorges and so on. But I'm a firm believer that for the most part, people aren't going to care about protecting the environment and our landscape if they don't experience it, right? We've got to get people out there seeing, wow, you've got this in your backyard. We can keep it beautiful, like the old license plate used to say. But if we don't, we're going to lose it. And we have certainly lost. I mean, there's been a few waterfalls in Hamilton area that got so busy that they shut down access to the gorge. People, as I say, were getting injured. There was damage being done, and so on. And I don't think those are the type of people that we tend to attract in our group, our Facebook group at least. We tend to have a very, and we try to take a very mature approach to things. As I said earlier, we don't allow people to post photos on private property or prohibited areas. And my thinking here is that we can show that we're doing the right thing, and hopefully it will keep the rest of the waterfalls open for us for years to come.
Yeah, no, I remember the first time I posted, because it was a real honor to post on the Facebook page, and of course the website speaks for itself. If you got a couple of stories from contributors that stick out in your mind for any reason whatsoever.
Well, there's one guy that is doing a lot of backwoods exploring, getting into waterfalls that I wouldn't get into. I think you mentioned the one at Agua Canyon, or up Agua River at least. He's been to a couple that you can only get to by rail. And that's the sort of extreme adventure that I'm certainly not. I am a weekend adventurer. I'm not going to lie. I've been all across the province, but people getting into things where you're looking at overnight hiking. I know, for example, we know Hap Wilson, who has the Cabin Falls set up in Temagami, and there's waterfall after waterfall after waterfall that, again, most of us are never going to be able to see. It requires a multi-day camping trip. And I got a couple other people that get around into Algonquin Park. Again, we're not talking the Highway 60 corridor or the overnight 1 or 2 night trips. They're way in the back finding things that, again, I know I will likely never see. And they're not necessarily big draws, but they're these gems that they're out there. You may only be 5 or 6 people seeing them a month, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to me because up here in the north, you're used to going out and seeing that stuff in our backyard. But what really fascinates me about this map is the amount of things that people down south, like even down as far as like the London area, where you can go out and there are places that you don't have to take a 4-hour trip up, Highway 11 to kind of see this stuff. This is like right in some of these people's backyards in Hamilton, Mississauga area. So I think that's a big boon to a lot of people who are from the south who want to maybe see some of these things and might not realize it's right there for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's what Mark has done very successfully, is that people can access these things and say, I want to go and see that. And that's, I mean, Mark doesn't hear this every single time from every follower, but that's what happens. And there's no better reason to, as we've all said earlier, just to get outside and enjoy nature.
And Mark, one quick question, sorry, just about the map here. I see that these symbols are color-coded, the circles are color-coded. Is there any reason why they are that way? Do they indicate a certain thing?
Yeah, so this is my geography background coming into play, or trying to come into play. So first of all, they're either green, yellow, red, or blue, and the symbols are larger or smaller. So the largest symbols are generally the waterfalls that I feel are the best. So they may not be the biggest. They usually are bigger, but they offer lots of experience. You can wander around. They're easy to access. There's a good parking lot. You're going to be there for an hour or two or longer. The smaller dots are often, it's a little rapids on the side of the road, or it's down an old side road. And most people are going to look at that and say, this is a waste of my time. But for the right person, sitting there and quiet and enjoying the day, even if the waterfall is only half a meter high, for example, it can still be a nice reward and nice find. So the color scheme is intended to give some information about how easy it is to find. So green means go, right? So green means a waterfall is generally, there's no problem finding it. There's going to be a good road. The trail is well established. There's no climbing or overnight camping, for example, in order to find it. Yellow means caution. So it means that there might be something along the way. The road might not be great, especially during winter. The trail might be a couple hours long, for example. There might be some steep hills. Maybe there is no trail. Blue and red are water only. So a lot of the most remote falls are identified as red, meaning stop and think. You've got to plan ahead. This isn't just something for a day trip. And on this recent edition of the website, I added blue, which generally means it's a canoe trip or a paddle that's, a couple hours, several kilometers away, something that you could put in, go see it and come back, and back in time for dinner kind of thing, without having to bring camping gear.
So as soon as I asked that, I scrolled down on the website and realized that it all says that on the website. But we figured it out. Thank you for the explanation. It's good for some of the listeners.
Well, for sure. We're turning people on to Waterfalls of Ontario. And,
yeah.
We've had Hap Wilson on and James Raffin and Adam Schultz, and I guess we should have asked them about their favorite waterfalls. But I know for me, it's always the next one. And again, in the last 48 hours, I was able to see 2 new waterfalls, and I look forward to seeing the next one. That's for sure.
As we start to wrap up here, do you have anything you want to finish out on, Bill? Well,
we had Ron Brown on Ghost Towns of Ontario, and I was just thinking as Mark was talking, he's done us a great service by putting this all together, because it is one of those valuable resources. And even in our short time today, I really like that, that idea of a boundary, because it's so important. It is in our backyard, our Ontario backyard, and it's yours to discover.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Anything you want to leave us off with?
No, I guess the only thing I would say is when you're out and about, be sure to treat the land and the communities with respect. We are certainly, Ontario is growing. There's a lot of pressure on natural areas. And we've also have seen some of them closed due to bad behavior. So, let's all do our part. That's the message I keep hammering, and stay safe, obviously, too.
Let's go waterfall watching.
A big thank you to Mark for taking the time to chat with us. Of course, you can visit his website at waterfallsofontario.com. It is a really cool site. It's really neat how it has that retro but still new feel to it. I really like it. If you're somebody who wants to look for a great adventure, great day, and again, there are a lot of these waterfalls in southern Ontario. Like if you're sitting there in the GTA area, they're right in your backyard, as much as they are right in our backyard here in North Bay with Descheny Falls and the surrounding areas around us. Check out the website and try and go to a couple and see how the trip is. And Mark really kind of sells you on kind of the importance and how cool of a trip that it can be, a great way to get kind of outdoors. If you are watching the video version of this podcast, which you can find on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, you'll see a bunch of the different video and photos that Mark sent me of some of the places you can visit. Again, a lot of them being in Southern Ontario. So highly recommend that you go find one close to you and just check it out and see what it is. If you are an audio listener of the podcast, or if you want to just check out the audio only version, you can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Just search the Backroads Bill podcast. And of course, you can always find us at NorthBayEcho.ca, where you can also see other great North Bay podcasts, whether it's highlighting amazing people in our community with North Bay with Love, or discussing important topics happening in the city right now in the Echo Essentials podcast. There is something there for everyone. We have sports, we have entertainment. There's so much that you can find over on NorthBayEcho.ca to find the show that is perfect, or shows that are perfect for you. And of course, we also have a newsletter as well, Echo Essentials. It is free. It gets emailed right to you every Tuesday and Thursday, and it's a great way to keep up to date with the happenings that are happening in the Echo network, as well as other news and events happening right in our community here in North Bay. Well, that about does it for us on this episode. We will be back again next Wednesday, as always, for another story and yet another Backroads adventure.